Hey everybody, it's Candy, aka Brown Eyed Girl 69. How y'all doing? Well, welcome back to another session of Mr. Wolf and Me. We're going to be reading chapter 5 in this episode. After I take a nice rip, so I can enjoy that buzz. Alright, let's get after it. Return to Pin Hill. As you know, we were talking about Miles, Mr. Wolf, and Sheriff Cravens in the last chapter. That day got darker and darker, and it wasn't just in my head. The faintly milky sky developed great dark-bottomed thundered heads that drooped and threatened beyond the windows. It was a perfect waste of time for me to stay in school. I kept telling myself that I was stupid to worry. Once that old Jordan Agger saw Mr. Wolf, he would have to back right off. There aren't any German Shepherds in our town that are even the same color as Mr. Wolf. Where they are brown and tan, his hair is a deep glossy black against the silvery light part. But with my luck, the man might be colorblind. Then what? Social studies is my next to last class. By the time I got there, I was driven to use Mom's trick with my head. I just plain turned my whole brain off because I couldn't stand the sound of it boiling and fuming in there. While Mr. Walters droned on about the Ice Age, I sat and stared out at the row of township maps he had put up along my side of the room. I knew my own map wouldn't be there because I had put a peanut butter sandwich down on my copy. The big market left was transparent, looking like stained glass without any color. But some people in the class had done really super jobs of filling the maps in and coloring all the different things. Emily Ann is that kind of person who does so much extra stuff that she forces the regular guys like me right off the bottom of the curve. She had put into Shaker Village and Fruitlands and the Common with both churches and the right number of houses. Bear Hill Pond was a pale mirror with ducks on it, and Pin Hill was sprinkled with spots of gold like the color of the nut trees the day Mr. Wolf and I went up there. Seeing Pin Hill right there on the map brought me my great idea. It was such a jolt that I nearly jumped out of my chair. There we go. There's Pin Hill. Well, it's a map of the area. I just plain turned my whole brain off because I couldn't stand the sound of it boiling and fuming in there. Oh, I'm sorry. Seeing Pin Hill right there on the map brought me my great idea with such a jolt that I nearly jumped out of my chair. The groundhog. I didn't even have to wait for that Jordan Aggers to come over to clear Mr. Wolf. That groundhog would be lying out there in that clearing still. If Sheriff Cravens just went out with me and we found it right there where I said it was, he could see for himself how Mr. Wolf got so tore up. Somebody nudged me, or I never would have known that Mr. Walters was speaking to me in the tone of his that would take rust off of a bike fender. Unless you're planning to stay after school and entertain me for 30 minutes of detention, I would suggest you stop bouncing up and down in your seat. Yes, I told him. No, sir, I'll be still. He watched me silently a minute before starting in again on what happened to a landmass when a glacier moved over it. And like the motion of a glacier over a landmass, the period finally got through, and then the next. And I was free. When I got home, I made Mr. Wolf get up and walk the length of the driveway and back with me. He obviously did it only to please me, but I still felt like he ought to move around more and not just lie there like he was trying to die. His tail and his ears all hung down as if they had weights on them, and he kind of flopped his feet along at every step. I couldn't even get him to drink any water after I took him back in. I guess you filled his food dish again? I asked Mom hopefully. It didn't look as if what I'd put in that morning had even been touched. She shook her head. He'll eat when he feels like it, she said placidly. Great wisdom like that should be cut in stone. I thought angrily, repeating her words to myself. He'll eat when he feels like it. Oh boy, dogs die when they don't eat, just like people do. Already the great cave of Mr. Wolf's lungs were striped with rib marks where his bones were sticking out. When he wouldn't even sniff at a dog biscuit, I laid it on the floor near his nose in case he changed his mind after I'd left. I have an errand downtown, I told her. You might get caught in the rain. Hint. It suddenly occurred to me that if I wanted to get out to Pin Hill to check for that groundhog, I needed to get Mom's stalled before she got her head shifted into high. I'll take a raincoat just in case, I offered pleasantly. Her eyes widened in surprise. She knows I never take a raincoat anywhere except under the pain of death. In spite of her astonishment, she decided to press her luck. And boots? She added. Suggestion. I nodded and went right to the closet where we kept the heavy weather gear. By the time I got the boots pulled on and the raincoat out, she was humming an aimless little tune to herself. I hid my grin. It didn't even matter to me that she thought she had won that round. The important thing was to get to Sheriff Craven's and persuade him to go out and look for the groundhog. And I hate getting the gears on my 10-speed wet, but I had spent too much time with Mr. Wolf to have any extra minutes for walking down to the sheriff's office. The rain was already spattering as I reached the common, and I was actually glad of the raincoat by the time I pushed open the door to the sheriff's office. He was on the phone when I came in, but motioned me to a chair and waggled his eyebrows at me. The voice coming from the phone in his hand sounded from where I sat like a country music record being played at the wrong speed. Every once in a while he would murmur yes, and the sound would slacken a bit. By the time the squawk had settled into a medium range, he was nodding soothingly. That would be very big of you, he said finally. Give it another week and then check back with me. Then I knew you would, Mr. Perkins, and I appreciate it. I really do. I had to grin because I'd figured out what was going on. Everybody in town knows that Joshua Perkins and his brother-in-law, who owns houses next door to each other on Stowey Road, are always getting into fights. Between fights, they play checkers together and go fishing and drive over to Concord for dinner. But when they have an argument, one always ends up calling the law out on the other. It's like a small world to itself, our town, I decided. Like the day that Mr. Austin, Dad's friend, had stepped in when Jordan Agers was asking me hard questions about Mr. Wolf. He not only knew Jordan Agers, but had made some reference to what kind of a boy he had been. It scared me a little, but it was reassuring too, as if the whole town was a larger extension of our own family. Surely you didn't come down here in the rain just to stare at me, Sheriff Craven said. I shook my head and shot to my feet. No, sir, I had a great idea, I told him. You had an idea? Let me decide how great it is, he corrected me with a grin. Don't you think that if we went out to that clearing and got that big groundhog, that we might be able to convince Jordan Agers that he's making a mistake in accusing Mr. Wolf? The sheriff looked thoughtful and then glanced at the window. Might be, he said. But I think it'd be a better idea if we waited until tomorrow when it may not be raining cats out there. But if we wait until tomorrow, the buzzards might carry him away or something. He rose and tugged his jacket off of the peg. Are you telling me that buzzards take Fridays off and go back to work on Saturdays? Before I could answer, he had his jacket zipped and was holding the door open for me. I need to be back in about an hour when the local citizens start backing their cars into each other to celebrate the coming weekend. Can you lead me right to the place? It's on Pin Hill, I said. It is 20 miles from one end of Pin Hill to the other, he pointed out. It's close, I assured him. Where those hickories are, at the very south end? He nodded approval and asked, "How did you get down here?" "My bike," I told him. "Well, go in my car," he said. "But for goodness sake, lock that bike up tight. I can't even keep track of my own coffee cup in this place. There's no telling what would happen to your bike." It was raining steadily by the time that we pulled off the road up to Pin Hill. I stood near the car, staring into the woods, while the sheriff struggled into a giant green rubber poncho. "This way," I said, starting through the trees as if I was really sure of where I was going, which I most certainly was not. Suddenly, all of Pin Hill looked different to me. The rain darkened everything so that even that special yellow of the hickory leaves didn't show much. In the day since I'd been there, the wind had tugged a lot of the leaves off, so that the woods looked naked and bare, showing the great untidy squirrel's nest lodged most dangerously above our heads as we pushed our way through the trees. The first two clearings I chose were wrong. I got edgier every time I saw Sheriff Craven sneak a peek at his watch. Just when I was feeling really panicky, I saw, in the clearing ahead, the stick I had used to force the two fighting animals apart. I ran to it with a yelp. "Here it is! This is it!" I called out. I expected to find that great lump of reddish-brown animal lying there by the stump where I'd last seen it. Instead, the clearing was empty, except for that big, heavy stick of mine. "Where's the varmint?" Sheriff Craven asked, looking around the clearing. "Maybe I didn't kill him all the way dead. Maybe something already carried him off." I felt suddenly desperate. "But look, you can see there was a fight here." It was true. The bushes were all crushed down, and the grass matted over. There was even some watery dark stains of dried blood on the carpet of leaves on the forest floor. Sheriff Craven studied the scene carefully and then nodded. "Something happened in this clearing," he said. "That's plain enough. But without the groundhog, I don't know how much we can make of it." Aggers is ready to make a federal case out of those lambs of his, and I don't much blame him, since it's the only source of income on that farm of his mom's. He isn't going to be easy to convince of anything. "But it's the truth," I wailed. "Jordan Aggers is equally sure that what he knows is the truth too," he reminded me. Something inside of me wilted. I felt heavy with discouragement. I turned and started back toward the car. I thought the sheriff was right behind me, but when I got there, I looked around and saw that he'd gone back into the woods a little further and was putting something inside the green big poncho he wore. "Maybe a handful of nuts," I thought drearily. "At least he won't have wasted the whole trip out here." "What happens when both sides of an argument are sure they have the truth on their side?" I asked when we were both inside the car. The sheriff flicked on the heater. The air steamed from our wet clothing. As he pulled the car back onto the road to town. "In a court it is called a trial," he said mildly. "Between countries, it's called a war." The next chapter is going to be called The Shadow of a Doubt. Thank y'all for taking the time to come by and listen to me read. Sometimes I might not read it as accurately as I would like, but I do try to read it as close to the way it should be read. And until the next time, y'all have an awesome, wonderful, amazing day, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you may be. And we'll catch you on the next go-around.